Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kavi Kavusi, and I'll be discussing a diverse array of subjects that span from my experiences in the emergency room to the furthest reaches of the universe. I'll be hosting guests, inviting illuminating conversations that at times may challenge ways of thinking or being, while also nurturing curiosity, meaning, and awe into life. Please consider subscribing, liking, saving, or sharing this podcast with any of your friends or family if it feels right for you. Thank you for taking the time. Let's dive into the podcast. Joined today by Pandora Skyes. And she's corrected me on that because I kept saying sky. I've been so conditioned by it. Thank you for making your way all the way across the city to come and see me and join. Yeah, so she's dressed very formidably. And I'd love to start by hearing about the choice of attire and the interesting choice of pin of a heart.
Choice of attire. I don't know. I just wake up and I put on whatever makes me feel like I'm winning.
Yeah.
Life. And this was actually, okay, so this blazer is super blessed now by my first performance with my latest band, Sahara Sun. And we just performed on Friday. It was the event that you couldn't make out to, but it was absolutely fantastic. We'll play again. It's okay. Yeah. And I was wearing this blazer and I was gifted this pin by a very special friend, B-Star. And I believe she made it. And, you know, she's all about the heart and symbolism and what different metals and symbols can bring to your life in terms of, like, as you say, like bringing pause and creating an awareness and an intention for stuff. She's creating this whole beautiful clothing line around symbolism, geometry, sacred geometry, lots of really cool artistic things. And so she gifted me this. I put it on just before the performance and I'm wearing the same blazer. Hasn't been washed, so it has all of the good vibes from the show.
But where that show was a moment of performance, there's no obligation to perform here. This is just presence and embodiment. And
here's the thing, it wasn't performance either. Like, when we play music, I don't feel like I'm performing. I can't. If I feel like I'm performing, I know I'm going to do badly. I know I'm gonna fuck it up because it's gonna be me, and I'm always gonna fuck things up. Sorry, can I swear?
Yes, you can.
Great.
If anything, we'll just say it's a seal in French. You can easily argue your way out of that.
So, yeah, if I'm there, I'm going to mess it up. Pandora can easily mess things up all the time. If I step out of the way and I just let music happen and I just let music come through from the place where it comes from, anything that comes out of my mouth, it's going to be right. It's going to be perfect because I have no hand in it. No human mistake can alter the thing that comes out. And somebody, just before I got on stage, I was nervous. Like, things were, you know, when you're fixing sound, things always go wrong. A million things go wrong. And I was like, I don't know. Like, we just wrote 2 songs yesterday morning. Haven't really had that much time to prepare. Something is gonna happen. I don't know what. And she was like, anything that comes out of your mouth is perfect. Actually, I think that was B-Star who told me that. Lots of
We're gonna mention B-Star probably 7 times this conversation.
You need to have B-Star here.
I'd love to.
Yeah. So anything that comes out of your mouth is perfect. And I was like, yeah, it's true. And it will be if I fully step out of the way and just, like, let music happen. And that's what happened.
Do you find music is created more in chaos, or do you find that it's birthed from somewhere else? Because if you're saying you're feeling this scatter and if you have to get out of the way, what is that you're speaking of in particular?
The scatter is the humans trying to figure it out, you know? It's the sound going wrong. It's the guitar not working and us having to pick up another guitar like an hour before the show. It's like people getting in and suddenly the sound check that we did an hour before is totally different, and this is not coming through and this is not coming through, and like all the things that you need to figure out with sound. That is a chaos. And I think it's mostly insecurities, as trying to predict things that could go wrong. And even things that couldn't go wrong, just like trying to predict, so much trying to predict when you're going to perform, when you're preparing for like a big thing, an important thing. And it's the chaos is really just like mind chatter is just like static. Getting out of the way is like recognizing that you can prepare up to a certain point, and you can predict things to up to a certain point, and you can prevent them up to a certain point, and then you have to let go. It's a level of like control up to a certain point, and then complete letting go, because there is a line, and when you step over that line, you can't do anything else to control the situation, and you just have to let go, because if you keep holding on, it's just not gonna happen.
Do you find in those moments that you're letting go that you're immersed in it, or do you find that you're almost separated from it? Some people I've heard have this derealization like experience, whereas the others may have such a profound immersion where it's almost like life's at stake if I don't remain right here, and then they're just incredibly existentially present.
It's somewhat both. There is such incredible presence and groundedness that, for me personally, needs to happen in order for music to come through clearly. I have been in spaces where I'm singing and I'm fully out of my body, and that's one experience. And that's more of an experience of like jamming and like chanting and fully letting go and just seeing what happens. When you're performing pre-written songs and pre-written lyrics, you need to be somewhat in that physical experience. I need to be in my body. I need to really be present with every single sound and every single breath, and the moment that I need to breathe, and how long this note will go for, and being with my partners and like being in sync with one another. So there is a level of like connection to the present moment and to the people around me. Also just being present with the audience and like, what are they feeling? Are they hearing it?
Yeah.
Is it translating? Do I need to give them more emotion? Are they in the emotion? So there's all of those considerations, but there is just a level of letting go into the sound, like letting the sound take over you, letting the sound fully like resonate through your body and letting it move you, and as it moves you, it moves everyone else. So it's kind of both.
So well said. And what I've noticed in some artists that's incredible is how they capture themselves and they capture the audience, recognizing that the listener, as much as the individual who's delivering it, the entire symphony is as much received as is much given. And the pause allows the digestion of that in particular. And I mean, I know Pandora for over 6 years now, and we met at Burning Man, and there was a group that she had at the time called Vibe with the Tribe, if I'm right?
That's right.
And I bought their album, and I still listen to it to this day. And when I'm hearing your expression of the artistic experience, where there's the hesitance at times, there's the questions, there's the concerns, there's the curiosities, then there's this deliverance that's beyond what she could have perceived before, but could have only been realized in that moment. I'm almost surprised yet completely recognizing how the human experience is. That I'm like 6 years of vetting, and she must have been doing it before. She's been nailing it. But this is probably the truth of what the artistic expression is. And I can imagine even the most seasoned artist who goes up on stage, including yourself, probably has those moments, because that inner dialogue is present there for a reason. And it sounds so well how you encapsulated it, where you anchor yourself in to bring yourself to trust with the team that you're with and the environment, and allowing the audience to be your guidance, not as defining who you are, but as a point of reference for where you can take it. It's so beautiful, because that's someone who's in dynamic relationship with the environment while she's delivering art. Because when people leave, your music, the testament of what you guys invited in that moment, is the wallpaper of the experience that they're reflecting back into.
Yeah, we always say like many things, but
we say many things.
there are so many different points that I want to touch on, but the audience being not an audience. They're not an audience. They're not there listening to music. You know, they are creating the music just as we are. And this is especially true when we are jamming. We do a lot of like live jams where we just flow and there are people around and people are dancing and maybe they're playing some instruments too. Maybe they're chatting, they're eating grapes. It doesn't matter. They create the music with us. It doesn't matter what they're doing. Sometimes we will record and we'll just let something record for like an hour and then we'll listen back to like pick at the little bits of stuff that we really liked. Oh, there's this particular melody, and you can just hear people's conversation on the background, and then that is truly like our favorite thing, and we really want to sample some of those conversations because they're beautiful, like deep, amazing conversations, and you're getting this insight sort of as like a fly on the wall. But even when those things don't come into the final edit of the song, like people's energy have such a powerful effect on the music. And with Sahara San and with the group that we're kind of forming or formalizing right now, when we do shows, we want to not separate. Right now it's very separated. You have artists and you have audience. It's like stage, you listen, we do our thing. We want to break that barrier as much as possible. Like we recognize people's influence on our music and how their energy and how the dancing and how the vibing really impacts everything and creates the optimal environment for the highest quality and highest vibrational music. We want to have people on stage, just as we have people on stage during our jams. When we go and we play at a festival, I'm going to be calling them up like, excuse me, I'm going to need 40 plus ones. I need all of my friends on stage. They can be sitting in pillows and they can be dancing and doing their thing. And we're going to play music and we're going to try to make it as much of a real jam party scenario as possible. And like whenever possible, I really don't want to have a stage at all. I want everything to be in one plane. I want to be maybe like not in the front, maybe like in the middle of things, like have everybody be facing each other in a circle. Like how can we do the actual experience justice? Because I don't think the stage audience is doing the experience justice. Like how can we actually support the magic? And I think circle configurations are super powerful for a reason. And I want to explore that. There are groups that do this right now, like Mardaleva is one of them, does it beautifully. They usually have people on one plane. They're usually in the middle. When you're in their parties, you can barely see where they are. It's much more about the collective experience of it all. And that's, I think, just nailing it.
I remember seeing them at Burning Man in 2019, I believe. And they were beside these two statues that were holding each other's arms, bruised, broken, battered, as we were facing out the second night before the man burn. And there was this incredible fire and the smoke that was going up as high and as far as you could see to the sky. And you look down and there's Robot Heart as the backdrop. And then this massive group of about 4,000 to 5,000 human beings gathering in celebration, but also with the fire in the center. But the fire wasn't a fire that was burning. It was the fire of the artistry that Mardaleva was expressing in that moment. And it was just so beautiful. I weaved my way through. And I had met Eduardo at a summer days gathering up in Camp Tamaqua in Algonquin Park. It was a fireplace. He was standing next to it, and we went and we had like this 2.5 hour immersive conversation. And you developed he had an artistic expression that carries him everywhere, with him everywhere. And then in the Mar de Leva experience, I can only imagine he has that circle that he creates, but I can only have coming to have known you over the past few years again, where I see your prioritization and your consideration for others and your sense of togetherness. I'm hearing it, I'm witnessing it here with you. And it sounds like, much like your book, which we'll get to, is called Bleeding in Pages. You seem to enjoy bleeding in stages, on stages.
On stages.
Bleeding on stages. What comes up when you think of bleeding on stages in contrast to bleeding in pages?
So the title is actually Bleed in Pages.
Oh, bleed.
Yeah,
I was just bringing a life. So bleed in pages. So there's a bleed on stages.
Yeah. I think it's accurate. I think the job of the artist is to bleed in public, is to take a scalpel, a dagger to your own fucking chest, cut it open, take the beating thing out of it, and be like, here it is, here you go. This is the most raw and the most vulnerable I can possibly get. Do you feel something?
Yeah. And watch your shoes. There's gonna be blood all over it on the way out, right? Like that's incredible. Because truthfully, when people have that type of experience with their artist that they go to, and they're timelessly immersed in it, they are walking out splattered. If there was to be anything on them, you're seeing the energy of the art that has just been smeared apart them. And I love the symbolism of what blood would mean there, because it's real and raw. And it's the essence of the human that the artist is offering in that moment. And at the same time, a lot of how the system is created, not intentionally but as a consequence of, is a lot of people will sacrifice that artistic offering where they bleed, but more as a jester rather than the artist that they are, because the art is robbed because they subscribe to having to play to the audience rather than truly just being immersed in it. So that's an amazing thing that you've become aware of, that you capitalize on remembering, and that you invite in through every one of your moments that you do step on stage where you bleed and they receive it. Yeah. So where did this, if we were to think of the birth of it, where did the birth of your creativity, you feel, emerge?
My creativity as a whole?
Well, if there was a place that your inner world in a moment says, oh yeah, this moment, was there like something that the colors became vivacious in a moment of life, and you're like, this is something to encapsulate, and it was an invitation over and over subsequent to that?
There are a few moments. There is one moment in my childhood where things were bright and every color was at its fullest and saturated. And then there was a period of my life where everything was gray. And then there was a turning point. And then there was a turning point. And then there was a turning point. Like, it has been since the change from grayscale to color. It has been increasing ever since. But maybe let's just start in the beginning.
Right.
I remember when I was maybe 4 or 5. Yeah. And I first started learning how to write. I don't know if this is the point where it started, but I remember my mom gifting me this huge book. Huge. And it was a book of poetry. Okay. And it was meant for children, I think. And it had, I don't actually know the name in English, maybe form poetry, which is essentially as you're writing the poem will take the shape of one of the motifs in the poem. And to my 5-year-old mind, that was the most brilliant thing that could possibly exist. And I remember this poem about a sunflower, and the poem took the shape of a sunflower, like the actual words took the shape of the sunflower. And it was so beautiful. I was in awe, and all of the poems were kind of like that, like very vibrant, very beautiful. And that's what inspired me to start writing. And I started writing my own poetry, and my poetry would take shape of things. I thought that was so awesome. And I started writing poetry for people in my life. Like every time somebody had a birthday or Christmas or whatever, I would just write them a card and write them a poem. And that was like the beginning of my creativity, I think. I was never too good at like painting. Words were always my main thing. Words and movement. I was a dancer. I was a gymnast. And then I think maybe around 9, my world started turning pretty gray. And I think, for most 9-ish-year-olds, you start going through like a bit of an emo phase.
Mm-hmm.
But from age 7-ish, I started being sexually assaulted. And I didn't understand what that meant. But I think there was part of me that knew something was very wrong. And parts of me started being shut off. And I started changing. I started going from like a very, very bubbly, like happy, extroverted child. I started being like slightly more angsty and like closed off and tense and stressed. And I think around 9, it like fully went 180. And I went into my hardcore emo phase, and I was sad and pissed off all the time. Very reactive, very, very, very reactive. I had no control over my emotions. I just remember like a guy would piss me off and I would slap them in the face. And it was just like automatic. And these were my friends. And something clicked in me after like a few times of this happening. And I was like, what is happening? What is wrong with me? And I didn't know. I didn't know what was wrong with me because in my conscious mind, nothing was happening to me. My brain developed such a mechanism to, I think, keep me alive, where every time some trauma would happen, every time I would be sexually assaulted, my brain would instantaneously erase it from my mind. So I didn't even have the chance to like deal with it or even know that like something bad was happening. And I only knew what I was experiencing like day to day. And this like anger lasted for a large part of my teenagehood. But the realization that something was happening to me, it came, I think I was 13. So it went from age 7 to maybe age 13 without me knowing what was happening, which looking back is so wild, like such a wild mechanism of like instant amnesia. But it was what needed to happen in order for me to stay in that situation. And even though I can think back and be like, oh, but why would you want to stay in that situation? There were many more things at stake. And hadn't I stayed, I don't know what would have happened, right? And so my brain thought that that was the safest possible avenue to take. And therefore, we need to erase these memories so that we can keep moving forward until you have the wherewithal to deal with them. So I remember being 13 and I was in my bedroom and I don't know what was happening. I think I was just listening to music. And I remember the room started spinning really fast and almost like I'm watching a movie in front of my face. All of the memories started coming back at once. And I was watching it and in disbelief, really. Like I was in full denial for a while. I'm like, nah, that shit doesn't happen. That doesn't happen to actual people. Like, I had no bearings for what that meant.
You're 13 at the time when this video is shown.
When this video started showing itself to me. And there were no, like, hashtags on the internet about, like, end sexual abuse. Like, when I don't know when I was 13, a long time ago. But we didn't have that, you know. People didn't talk about it. It was the most taboo subject, especially with children, especially within your like family, which is usually where it happens. So all this starts coming back to me, and I'm like, no, this doesn't happen. This only happens in movies. This is not happening to me. Da 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 da. And almost like going through the stages of death, I went through all the stages until I accepted what had happened. And then I remember making a decision, making a promise to myself that I would never tell a soul, because that was my experience and my weight to bear. And if I told anyone, I would then impose upon them an experience that was painful and undesirable. And if I just kept it to myself, it would only be painful to me. It would always be painful to me. But if I shared it with somebody else, if I shared it with my mom, which she would be the person most impacted by it, maybe my dad too. But if I shared it with her, then that would my pain would become her pain, and I didn't want that to happen. So I made the decision then to never speak about it, and I kept that promise until I was 21. But yeah, from then on, I just became more and more apathetic. That was the only way that I could keep living with a lie. And I couldn't connect with my mom. We fought all the time. Like, I thought we were just incompatible. We couldn't see eye to eye, and there was always a tension between us. And to me, it was just like, we're just not supposed to be friends. Right. I always wanted to be friends with my mom, and that was not a thing. Looking back, though, I realized that there was no way we were going to connect with this gigantic lie in between us. And the moment things started changing, and you can interrupt me at any point.
Well, I'm curious there in that moment, because you even today, I mean, we acknowledge it as a lie, but it was the unavailability based on the agreement that we made upon ourselves to invite the truth forward. The truth was there. The burden of the truth you had imposed and said, I'm going to keep it on myself, because sharing it would invite the obligatory imposition onto the other. Whereas in certain spaces, there's the opportunity to share and it just be unconditionally witnessed. But it's very challenging for the other person, especially when there's skin in the game, familial, that they don't take it upon themselves and feel the burden, especially if it's their life through them that came forward, that is having this transgression onto them. And I can't imagine, as you were sharing this, you were speaking of the testament of our capacity to repress certain thoughts, experiences, feelings, until there's a moment where they just break through. Yeah. And you were at 13 had the capacity to witness it in all of its immensity, and then still make an agreement based in acknowledgement of what the weight was. That's a massive testament of the weight that young you was carrying. Wow. And I can imagine, like we invite that opportunity for truth forward at the expense of everything. If we had this belief that said it will literally hurt everyone else and I cannot harm others. What a beautiful level of protection for other in the belief that came up in that time. Yeah. Please continue. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, that's exactly it. I think I've always been a big protector, and family is always and will always be my priority, and I will go to great lengths to protect them. And a 13-year-old me had the same mindset. Yeah.
Wow. There's something about when you recognize the child is no longer a child when an experience happens that has asked them to separate themselves from their innocence. And so often it's imposed or brought upon by another. And very often it's in someone's unawareness or unconsciousness that they're not intentional in their act, aware of how the act that occurs can be spilled onto other, and the ramifications can be so immense beyond like our linear thinking minds. It's exponential, and for many it's a lifetime. But I've come to know you for the brilliance that you exhibit and express, but we often hear so often as a human being, it comes through places of sufferance, and then reconciling that, because the moment that a repressed idea is uncorked, however it may be, that portion of our psyche that's so beautifully wired to keep it at bay for us to continue on. It sounds like, and thinking where this woman creates and she invites this abundance of creation, that inner world that knew that thriving had to go through the confrontation with the stories of survival.
Yeah.
That's there's no question there. There's just like pause and digestion of the immensity, because if the sky is gray and your entire world is painted in a similar picture, your reclamation of the vibrance of what life is a painful one to navigate back through. How did that continue forth? Where did life bring color back, if you may share?
Yeah. So, I moved to Canada when I was 16.
What was your reason for coming to Canada?
My mom kind of predicted the economic collapse of Brazil, which is still in the middle of.
It's a long collapse.
It's a long and sad collapse. Yeah. But yeah, she felt it coming. She was like, okay, we gotta get out. So we did. Unfortunately, we did get out with the person that was, inflicting pain on me and my family.
And you're still the only one that's aware at this time
of this person.
Yeah.
No, everything is out now.
At that time when you moved to Canada.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
So 16-year-old you is still carrying this. It's been 3 years
Fully.
now.
Yes. From remembering to moving to Canada, 3 years. So the sexual abuse itself, I think, stopped when I was around 14. That's when I started to, after I was aware of what was happening, very few instances happened after that, because I would just, I think I got to a level of anger that made him scared.
Did he express remorse at any point?
I don't think
I apologize for asking if that brings up things. But
I don't think he ever expressed true remorse. He was fearful. He was fearful of me telling my mom. He was fearful of me telling people in general. So he would say things like, "Oh, I'm sorry, don't tell your mom." And I'd be like, okay. That's pretty much it. I don't think it was like because he was feeling guilty or anything. I'm not sure if he's able to feel that.
Did you feel openness or closed off, from other men at the time? Was there any form of like archetypal transference?
There was a bit of the opposite, I think. Oftentimes when you are sexualized when you're a child, you become a sexual being like before you are really ready to. And because of that, like I was very boy crazy from a young age. I've always felt really comfortable with men, which is probably what made him feel so comfortable with doing what he was doing. I grew up in a family of mainly men, only have brothers, pretty much only had male cousins, always felt like a boy myself, like was very much in my skin when I was with men. So I just felt comfortable and safe. And up until then, I felt very unsafe with men afterwards, and like my later like teen years, and had to work through reestablishing trust with men. And it certainly comes up still, like I definitely feel safer immediately with women. It always takes a little more to feel safe with a guy or like a male presenting person. But yeah.
So 16, you came here,
Yes.
and then this experience is in a different environment now. It's largely become almost next to non-existent for 2 years now, but the person still is present, and now you're immersing yourself in Canada, and it's a completely multicultural variation of what you had experienced prior.
Yeah.
And where are you guys setting yourself up in Toronto, in this area?
We came to Vancouver.
Vancouver first, okay.
Yeah, we went to Vancouver, and I was in the middle of grade 10 when I arrived. And the sexual abuse stopped happening, but the power games never did. There was always like a lot of tension, a lot of like stare downs, anger, financial manipulation. That was one of the things that he could really hold over my head, like, oh, you know what will happen, right? Your brother won't be able to go to school, or like your mom won't have any money. And it's like, yeah, I get that. You definitely have the upper hand in that scenario. And me, as like a family protector, I'm never gonna do something to jeopardize my family's future. So a lot of tension, a lot of manipulation. Coming to Canada was one of the biggest dips in color in the world for me. I was a writer, I was very comfortable in my language. Coming to Canada, I felt like a total beginner again. I didn't know how to write. I knew how to like go to a coffee shop and order a coffee, but like I didn't get jokes. I like barely could catch what teacher was saying in class. Like I was good at math because it was the same, but English was pretty dire situation. So I felt super low in like my self-esteem, my ability to do things. Plus I was 16. Like I had just started cultivating that like nice group of friends who feel like they're gonna be your friends forever. And then I came here and then I had none of that.
Are you still in contact with them though?
I do, yeah. I do have a group of girls that I still chat with.
Well, I can only imagine what seeing some of your people from Brazil, like your home, your childhood, that grew up with you, come and they see you on stage or surrounding you in a circle at some point, where you not only are bringing them to a show that you have curated, but you show them the possibility of them being a part of that artistic expression that you're seeking to create through the circle.
Yeah.
And that brings things full circle. We're there in Canada, and yeah, the crew from Brazil ends up coming up. That I look forward to that day.
Yeah. Yeah, it would.
Yeah, beautiful. So then you're starting fresh again here, and then there's the colors that, again, especially Vancouver, which I know is gray in the skies, but the mountains are stunning.
They are. But it is raining for most of the fall and winter. So, and I came in the middle of the winter. Had never seen snow in my life. I came, it was like January something. And it was so cold. And it was so sad. And I went to school and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing here. And yeah, I was really depressed for a while until I found my homegirl, Marina, who you know.
Yeah.
We clicked. We didn't click, and then we clicked.
She was in Vancouver at the time too?
We finished high school together.
You guys, awesome. I didn't know that you guys both came across.
Yeah, I came, and then she followed me.
Okay. Do you think that it was pure friendship there? Was it some type of affection? Was it some role that you played for her? What do you think had her so drawn to come across? Was it just the depth of friendship?
Yeah, no. Not now. Now we are in the same level in our friendship. We're equals, back then she did look up to me as sort of like an older sister, I think. And she was kind of like seeing what I was doing, and I was like, that looks nice. Okay, I'll go do that too, you know? So there's a bit of that. But she really did. She saved me. She didn't make me less depressed. She might have made me more depressed, and I might have made her more depressed, but we were in it together. And she was the only person that I could sit down with and have a deep conversation when I was in school.
Why do you say made depressed? Like you made each other depressed? Because we can sometimes invite the other truths that are painful to feel, and they can invite depressed like symptoms, but what a gift to make contact with that, especially if it's supported.
100%. Yeah, we were both depressed to begin with. We just had very pessimistic views on the world. And when you encounter somebody that also has a pessimistic view on the world, it's just like affirmation, right? And I feel like you can drag each other a little deeper into that rather than encountering someone, they're super positive and you're like, okay, maybe there's some truth of that, and they elevate you a little bit. No, we just like really grounded each other's views. Well,
there's two really quick things that I could add there. I love that you stressed that you didn't have depression. You were experiencing feeling depressed. Acknowledging that that's a state that you were in rather than a pathology that you have that's stuck to you, that carries you everywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
Because that adds more capacity to be able to navigate through. And the fact that you found a friend who you guys were supporting one another. At most friend groups, I would argue, are friends who you have found who enable your coping. And where you guys initially start that way, hopefully through the evolution, both of the individuals, which seems to be in your guys' case as well too, grow through where the enabling was. There's an ownership, accountability, responsibility that's reclaimed from others, and then the friendship can flourish even though that may have been where the foundation was.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful, like for that to be the case, because you pay homage to, she was enabling my pessimism and I was enabling hers, but maybe that's the state of where we had to meet first for us to begin to start healing, because then we'd hear it through the other.
100%. And I think there is a gift in everything, and there is a gift in depression, and there is a gift in what I went through, in sexual abuse, in many forms of abuse. There is a gift in every single dark hole that you go into. And the gift in that depression was that we started thinking for ourselves. And we started questioning the world. We started questioning reality. We started questioning society, the ways that we do things. And rather than just like being in the teenage autopilot, high school autopilot, oh, let's gossip about this, let's gossip about that, which boy did you whatever, we would drive to the beach at night, like 2 a.m, and we would park on the beach. We'd sit in the car, we'd look at the ocean, and we'd just talk about life. We'd like ask each other questions about the meaning of reality, about like, do you think there are other forms of life in the world? Do you think we should really be doing this or that? Do you think that there's another way to live? Like, what if I just want to be an artist? And we did end up both being artists. But yeah, just like really sinking in with another person. And we weren't very emotional back then. I was definitely not emotional. I was in full apathy. So we didn't go deep in our vulnerability per se, but we did go deep into the mind, which was kind of like a gateway into what happened later on.
Right. Were there any moments at that time that, even though you were feeling blunted in your emotional availability to feel it, were there places that you still did feel? And if so, where were they?
At that point in my life, I was able to feel anger. I was able to feel, like very ecstatic in like social scenarios. We would get drunk and we would party, and music was always very moving to me. In terms of like my own feelings though, I had no contact with them whatsoever. I would get angry and I would feel low. I would wouldn't feel sad as in like I want to cry. I didn't have even access to that much. But I did have anger. That was that was my thing. And that was mostly like in home scenarios. Nobody in out in the world would see me really pissed off. But at home, and especially in interactions with the person who was really pissing me off. Yeah.
And so as you grew, you said the colors started changing, but what was the igniter? Did you hit a moment where you're like, I cannot be like this anymore? Or was there a particular invitation that happened in life that said, hey, there's another way? Or was it because often a human being shifts out of desperation, where the inner world maybe, or you're doing the creative work. I don't know if you were doing anything artistic already as a way to cope. Carl Jung says art is the cure for neurosis, and it's at least a temporary band-aid for many.
Yeah.
Where did you go with this, and where did Pandora start reblossoming, reemerging, and maybe coming to peace with aspects of what she was experiencing?
I had stopped writing at that point. I was writing up until I was 13. And then when I realized everything that was happening, I just stopped. And I was dancing. Dancing was always something that made me forget, completely exit my reality. And when I was a teenager and this started happening in Vancouver, I would party. I'd get as drunk as possible and try to forget my life. And I would dance. And I would dance as much as I could. So that's one art form that was there for me. And that does connect to where things started changing. And they didn't start changing, they just did. It was very much like something took me by the hair and pulled me out of the water. And that thing was MDMA. And I went to my first rave with Marina, to my first music festival in Vancouver. And we took MDMA one night, and it was our first time. I was probably 19. Actually, I think I had already moved, or no, it was my last summer in Vancouver before I moved to Toronto to go to university.
Who was the artist at the rave?
The people that were playing, I think it was Boys Noise. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I remember a name of a song in particular that really stands out that I don't know if I want to say here, but yeah. So you're Boys Noise, and you'd had this MDMA, and MDMA was revelatory and as an invitation back to feeling. What quality of MDMA do you feel? You don't have to go into the pharmacokinetics of it, but what quality of the MDMA? Was this the first time that you did it?
It was the first time I did MDMA.
Okay.
It was the first time. And I was on the dance floor, and we were dancing. And I just remember as though somebody was pulling me out of the water by the hair. And I took that first breath. After you're almost dying in there. You've been underwater for like 5 minutes. But this was like several years for me. And just the first breath and just that's what it felt like. And everything was colorful, and I could feel love, and I had not felt love in so long. Not that love, not that purity, not that strength, potency. I obviously always loved my family, otherwise I wouldn't be doing what I was doing. But to actually feel the depth of it, to actually like feel it in your bones, that was the first time. And I had been best friends with Marina for several years, and I had never opened up to her. I had never told her I loved her, and I had never looked at her in the face and like told her all the beautiful things that I loved about her, you know, like showing her true appreciation. And she hadn't really done it either, but especially me, I was very closed off. And any sort of like appreciation coming from me or to me was very uncomfortable to me. I always felt very uncomfortable with any sort of like compliments. And I just remember like having like our first real vulnerable, loving conversation, just like appreciating each other. And I remember going to see Eminem on one stage, and I was just singing in her ear, and she was just melting. And I think that was the first time that I really connected with my voice. And after that, things become undeniable. You know, that amount of love, if you feel it one time, you can't just go back and live in absolute apathy and feel like that's an okay way to be. So the moment I was able to move away from home, I did. I came to Toronto and I made my own life. And that's when I started being interested in meditation and mindfulness and yoga. And I started looking for different groups in the city. I knew nobody. And I found, like, the first people I found was actually a small group of Hare Krishna. And I went every Sunday, I went to their gathering and we would chant. And I'd feel the same sort of like ecstatic feeling and connection and this like loss of identity that I felt on MDMA.
What does it sound like? Do you remember any right now that you can share?
the chants?
If there's one that like is time sensitive but time mindful, but still like, is there one that still resonates with you to a day, even if it's a line?
Oh man. This is not my favorite one. I have other mantras that I love, but they were just super simple. And the thing was that you just repeat them over and over and over again for hours. So like Hare Krishna, I think it's Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, something like that. And you would just go. And you just go until you forget who you are and you forget who you're singing, or you forget who is singing. You don't know which voice is yours, which voice is coming from your neighbor. And they encourage you to stand up too and like move and like close your eyes and just lose yourself in music. And that, it was something I never missed for like a whole year. I'd go pretty religiously. But it still wasn't like my crew. It took me around a year to find like real friends. But that's when things started changing for me. And the moment I found my crew, I remember, you probably know Darren Hall.
Yeah.
He was hosting sound healings in his house, in his living room. And I saw one on Facebook and I was so nervous. I wanted to go so badly, but I didn't know anyone. I'm like, am I just showing up to this guy's house? Like, what is happening? And I was so anxious, and I did. And he opens a door and he's like, welcome. And I'm like, what? And I just hug him and I'm like, what? And I go in and it's like 7 people in his living room and he's doing this little sound healing. And I met my first like real best friend in Toronto there. And we became sisters right away. And that's when I started connecting with everyone. And that's later on, a little bit later on, when I met everyone that later formed Vibe with the Tribe and started making music together. It was like my little entry point. But MDMA was really the defining factor for me. Had I not taken it, I would have not felt what I felt, and I would have not gone looking for what I knew was true and what I knew existed out there.
Right.
But still, knowing and feeling all of these things, I still kept whatever was going on at home a secret. I didn't tell anyone, didn't tell the soul. I'd go back and I'd visit my mom and I'd visit my brothers and I'd see the person. But, you know, very cold, very much like trying to shield myself. And it became harder. After I opened my heart, after I started feeling my feelings, I'd go and I would just cry and I would just break down and I'd have a very hard time being in that house. And my mom thought I was going a little crazy. And I was. And she had no idea why, obviously. And this lasted a few years, you know, up until I was 21. And it was like a few weeks after I came back from my first Burning Man experience.
Which was what year?
That was 2016.
Same. So our shared Burning Man experience. Yeah.
That's when we met.
Yeah. And so you went from Vancouver to Burning Man? Is that what you mean? Or you went to Burning Man and then you went there?
That's right. I went to Burning Man, and then I'm like, oh, I'm going to go visit my mom on the way back. I went to visit my mom. I spent, I think, a month or just over a month there.
Yeah. So I want to preface in this moment that the moments, I guess 2 weeks before she'd gone back to Vancouver for this first confronting experience where she's connecting with a lot of the feelings and having these these profound cathartic releases where still cannot be shared. I can't imagine that after Burning Man, because Burning Man has a lot of, not inherently designed into it, but as an experience that emerges from it, being in a desert that's very hot, that you are dependent upon yourself, with incredible experiences of entertainment, individuals who are there intentionally with these principles that are beautiful things for human beings, not to live by, but to approximate to, and then invite back further into your life, or at least as a reconsideration, has you contemplating, digesting, and integrating so much of your life when you come back from Burning Man. But while we were at the burn, I had my first drone there. I'd been flying it for like 7 months at the time in Iceland. And then there was a ceremony that was happening at Burning Man. And I had come to know Pandora and a partner of hers that was considering to get married there. And everyone was on board for this miraculous wedding. And we were in this temple-shaped teepee that our camp had in the front of our camp, right on the Esplanade, which is the front of the burn. And with these drapes that were just shaking so beautifully with the wind, it created this beautiful ambiance and field where she got married on Playa. And I was being confronted with so many questions of who these people were, how liberated they were, how they were choosing Burning Man for their place to be connecting. But I had 2 close friends at the time who had invited me to Burning Man, which was my cousin Timmy Sotoday and my other friend Mike Sanders, who Pandora knows well. But at the time, I remember him inviting me and asking me, like, hey, do you think you can capture it with the drone? And I'm like, of course, I'd love to. I'm not sure if it's safe or whatever it is, but I remember seeing the moments and creating the video after, and the words that she shared were so evolved, and I was like frustratedly in awe of the intelligence that was being expressed through these words. And I'm like, how old is this kid? Like, expressing this to this depths? I had no idea, and it didn't matter anyway. I was just so immersed and lost in it, like as a testament to the invitation. And I think it was only a week or 2 after the burn where I'd asked you, hey, do you think you can read the script and send it over to me, because I'd love to complete making this video? And you did it again. And I don't know what that does in particular, but I feel like you recorded it again, which may have invited you back to some of the burn too. And then I don't know where you were in between there and going back to Vancouver. And now you sharing that was that fresh, raw moment of this. I don't know if it was a peak week for you, but I felt like it was for me. Yeah. Going to a place where a lot of some aspects of the abyss existed. Can't imagine how incredibly rapid that transition is and how confronting it can be. And short of being, I can understand why you cried, but I can imagine it was so much more. And when you were going crazy, yes, it is crazy for a human being to willfully immerse themselves back into that after, but you did it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, that was such a beautiful time. I remember it so clearly. And I remember talking with you after the wedding and organizing it all via Facebook Messenger.
Yeah. That was the primary way of communicating before. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was so beautiful. It happened so organically. We were 21, and we were like, we love each other so much. Let's get married.
Yeah.
Never been to the burn. That's fine. Let's go.
You know, if anyone is listening now, you can pause this and go listen to, you type 2016 Burning Man wedding. And what was our camp called?
We can link it.
Love
Cows.
Cows. Yeah. And it's there.
Yeah. It was the most beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the real world, in any environment or in any organization of the real world would be challenging, but going back into my family home was especially challenging. And I had no plans of telling anyone whatsoever. I just wanted to spend some time with my mom, to see my siblings, and then go on to my house, fly back to Toronto. And they wanted to see us. They wanted to see me and Raven just after we got married. So it was so mixed. Mm-hmm. It was so mixed of like highs and like, oh my God, this life still exists. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to one of my really, really dear friends in Vancouver who has helped me through so many things, David. And I remember him asking, I was really upset one night, and I think I just like went out for a walk or whatever, kind of like ran out of the house. Raven was there with me, by the way. Mm-hmm. He was there the whole time. But I ran out of the house like on my own, and I think I called David, and maybe he came to see me, and we were just talking. And he knew my situation. He knew it the best out of anyone. I think I had told him the most. At this point, I had told a few friends, mostly in Toronto. I had told Marina. I had told a few girlfriends. I had experienced like being witnessed and felt what that was like to be listened to, and felt the words coming out of my mouth. Because before moving to Toronto, I wouldn't even dare think about the experience. I would never write about the experience. I remember wanting to write about the experience so bad, and just like feeling like I was gonna puke. Mm-hmm. And my pen couldn't even touch the page. That was the level of like bottling I had come to. Mm-hmm. And then after the MDMA, after doing a couple of other plant medicines in Toronto, I experienced like actually saying the words to another person and being like held.
What did that feeling feel like?
Just like so much, there's so much fear and so much tension around truth. You know, when you've hid it for so long, and it's just like the monsters in the closet, you know. Mm-hmm. And every time I'd like think about saying it, I would just feel all these things like crawling to my chest and like lodging themselves in my throat, and I feel like I was choking, and like my skin was burning, and I was gonna die. And when I actually said the words, I think it was at a small festival one time, and it was just a group of women. It just felt beautiful. It just felt like such a relief, like to cry in front of another person, to be able to say things and just be looked at with love. Mm-hmm. Them not like needing to say anything back, or, you know, just like actual presence. Mm-hmm. It just felt different. It felt like love. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that not unconditional witnessing to the highest degree?
Yeah.
Yeah, like a love that has no conditions with it. We speak of unconditional love, but most people's love is conditional in some way. Mm-hmm. But in that moment, I can imagine when you're just asking for the witnessing, or not asking, a part of you has been yearning for it for so long, the deep confrontation with a long-held belief that this is an imposition, if it were to be anywhere outside of myself, keeps it, all the stakes are there in that moment. And then there's a liberation when you get to the other side and realize you don't die from it.
Absolute liberation. Yeah, true freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah, true freedom on the other side. Exactly. Realizing you don't die. No one dies. And I think little by little, like experimenting with saying the truth and realizing that nobody dies slowly gave me the courage to really let it come out. But I remember speaking with David in that trip, and he was like, when are you gonna tell your mom? And I'm like, never. It's absurd. A week, I think, passed, and Raven and I were getting ready to go to a party, and my mom was out of the house, and the guy was there in my house, and he just tried to play one of his little like power games. He never got tired of them, even though he couldn't go like as far, and maybe I think I got too old for him too, probably. He just loved a good power game. And he tried, and he didn't know I wasn't the little girl who was still scared of him. And when he tried, and I looked at him, and he realized it, and I just watched the blood drain from the top of his head, like down into the fucking earth. I've never seen somebody so pale in my entire life. And the amount of power I felt in that moment, not my own. I felt the power of every single woman, every single human who had ever been abused, who had ever been wronged. I felt the power of the earth, the power of the planets, the cosmos, entire existence rush through my body. And I feel it right now. And it feels so massive. And I had no control, or even there was no decision to be made. My mouth just opened and I just started screaming at him. Every single thing that I had been wanting to say for 12 years came out of my mouth. And it was like a tsunami. And I just saw for the first time like how small he always was and how massive I've always been. And I was screaming in Portuguese. Raven could not understand what I was saying. His daughter was there. She can't speak Portuguese either. She knew something was wrong, to the point that she called my mom and she said, I think my dad has done something very awful to your daughter. And she had no idea what I was saying. Raven and I went to the party. I got a call from my mom. She's like, I heard this and this happened. I'm like piecing things together now. Like, when you come back home, let's talk. And I was like, oh fuck, this is it. This is the moment. I had never spoken truth to him until that very point.
Were you feeling any rage at that time when you went to that party? Did you find yourself reaching for something to dissociate, or did you stay connected? Were you still connected?
I was free for the very first time. I felt such immense relief. When I was yelling at him, I felt like I was in actual flames. Like my chest was burning and my skin was becoming like burnt paper and flaking from my body. And it felt like the most power I have ever felt in my whole life. And after that, it was just pure. It was just like fresh snow, just relief, like clean first morning light, morning dew, just that breath. That's what I felt. I feel complete peace. And when my mom called me, I was like, well, this is it. This is it. I don't know what's going to happen, but the door has been open, and let's walk through it.
That must have been because I can imagine a lot of people, if they were to ever think about having a conversation of that immensity with their parents, especially having come to the same conclusion as you did, which must be a testament to how we are wired as the human beings that we are, that we want to not share some of the most profound pains that we've experienced in our lives with the ones that we love the most, because of this concern of the imposition and then them being hijacked, even if they are well-intentioned to be unconditional witnessers. How did you go there to her in presence of her physically to have that dialogue? Yeah. And if you feel comfortable sharing, what did that look like? Because that is a gift for, I think, that others can consider for the things that they carry. That in the ER, honestly, I'll see people on their deathbeds that's the only time that they open up to their loved ones about the possibility of the thing that they've been holding on for so long. The stakes that they thought were so high suddenly dissolve completely to invite that truth in. Yeah. When time is not guaranteed, there's no breath that's guaranteed. And so, if you do mind sharing,
it was the most beautiful thing that could have possibly happened. My mom reacted in the most beautiful way I've ever seen anyone react in any scenario. Just like strength and poise, and that kind of strength that is so quiet that you don't question. You're like, that is true power. Mm-hmm. I came home around like 2 a.m. and she came and she met me in my bedroom. We sat down and she was like, okay, tell me everything. I was like, okay, it's like tough. But I did. She didn't really say much. She would ask questions sometimes. She was like, okay. I could just feel, like in her silence, I could just feel the emotion, you know? She was probably feeling a lot of rage. She was probably feeling a lot of shock. But she didn't let me see any of it in the way that, like, she didn't want to make it that experience about her, you know? Even though it was as much about her as it was about me. Like, that is such an intense thing to learn about your husband. And she was just composure within a catastrophe. And she got up and she went to her bedroom. She was like, stay here. She went to her bedroom. She kicked my stepfather out of the house. 2 minutes, 5 minutes later, something like this. Mm-hmm. And then she came back and she was like, okay, he's gone now. And that was it. It was like...
What was their relationship until then? If you don't mind me asking, was she looking for a reason for it to be ending, or were they on good terms until this moment? If you don't mind me asking.
I don't think they were on great terms. I think he's a very difficult person.
Right. Because not to say that's not the last straw, but that's the entire box.
That is the whole thing. Yeah.
And I can only consider how the differences of a mother who comes to contact with a story when her child expresses something versus her adult child who expresses something. Because there's a level of protection that she's still beholding in every moment, that she knows at a certain young age, I hold all responsibility for her protection. Whereas you had demonstrated so much adult evolution, I'm sure, to her, that she felt a level of independence. And then that truth came through at a moment where I think she it seems like the rage had the opportunity to be simultaneously felt with the strength and poise with how she received you. And I'm not that I'm just recognizing the differentiator of times, because that burden could have been expressed and felt very differently.
Yeah, it's just it's a product of, it's entirely who she is.
Yeah,
that is entirely who she is.
That's your mama.
That is the person that you can look to when there's a freaking hurricane, and she will have her shit together.
Mm-hmm.
She's always been that pillar of strength and poise, and that's always been the thing I've admired about her the most. It's just like how strong in her peace she is in a lot of scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there might be all sorts of things happening, even interiorly, but she's able to always keep that level of like calmness. Yeah.
Beautiful. Wow. That is a really strong testament thus far of, if I were to hear like bleeding in cages, bleeding in ages, bleeding in rages, and then bleeding in pages, and bleeding on stages.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of blood.
Sorry, just the rhyme sometimes, like, you know, you get the cosmic jokes, but in the seriousness of this, not to bypass the immensity of it, where I'm here sitting and I'm feeling almost anger towards men. And also then the simultaneous portion that has compassion for, oh, they're just in unconscious awareness. No. When we are, to the degree that we remain unconscious and unaware, we have the higher likelihood of spilling that onto the rest of the world. And that is a testament of, I think, a large part of what we experience in the world today. I do that still. Even with, I feel, my level of where I'm at in my life, I still do this to a certain degree. So I can only imagine how the world doesn't. But in this moment, I feel the immense power and importance of men having places to spend some time bringing outward the repressed aspects of their world within before they perform any, or to act upon any form of transgression.
Yeah.
And if it's the case, minimizing the damage and bringing the truth forward, and asking someone as young as you were to carry the weight of that as long as you did and how you did, is a massive testament to how great the burden can be, and how, if there weren't these fortuitous moments that you still made available to you for you to feel again, to feel through, and then to confront, and then to absolve it, this is a testament of it. But you had to go through those pains as a result of the pain that was initially inflicted upon you. Yeah. So, and then you're still in your 20s now, I think, but you are, but this is some time ago. And how do you find play now, if there's such a thing? And how do you experience seriousness if one of the most serious, difficult, inescapable, insurmountable moments of your life has now been addressed?
I didn't get to be a kid, really. I went from being 5 to being probably like 16, like that. I didn't get that in between stage, because I had to grow up, and I had to be a woman at a time when I was a kid.
And a hurt woman right before a woman, right?
Yeah.
It almost feels like the graduation was one of a rite of passage of the most transgressed nature.
Yeah. Yeah, totally like damaged, hurt woman without any skills to actually be a woman. So I didn't experience play until my 20s. And that also came largely as a product of plant medicines and psychedelics, and being immersed in these creative worlds where everything was possible and everything was colorful. And LSD in particular bringing back my creativity and my connection with writing, my connection with storytelling, my connection with world building, and role play and my imagination.
Yeah. This is not brought to you by Tribe, but this drink, this apple cider vinegar drink, is insane.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so good.
There was a sale at Healthy Planet. So I bought one, and I'm like, this is so dope. I ended up going back and buying 22 cases.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So Tribe.
7 calories, 2 grams of sugar. That's insane.
Tribe. I'm bringing my tribe together, sipping this apple cider vinegar drink. It's not brought to you by this, but it can be.
It could be.
And also, I did a video recently where Pandora had written the script for Broya bone broth that now my friends are messaging me because it pops up on their feed. Of course, like Facebook advertisement, like that matrix is another thing. But if you need her to write a script for you, I'm sure she'll land it. And I'm happy to speak.
I do enjoy it. Yeah, we make a great team.
Yeah, thank you. So what we were speaking about just before we went to a break of reality, because our body has needs that are meant to be tended to as well. We were speaking about how she had connected with LSD, and I'm really curious. I've never experienced LSD with you.
Yeah. Right.
But I do know that when we were at the burn, when we went to the other side of Playa, I know that you guys were experiencing it and I wasn't. You guys had offered, but I wasn't.
Is this in 2018?
It may have been. Oh, it may have been 2018 then.
Yeah, I think it was 2018.
Yeah, I didn't feel like I could connect with you guys as much because I was in a partnership at the time that I felt I couldn't just be me. And that was my own early stuff. And the burn was so beautifully confronting for it, but I was so frustrated at that time because I'm like, I'd love to connect, but I felt at a distance from you guys. And I'm glad that 2019 had an opportunity for a regular connection, but then COVID happened, and then there was 2 years of hearing about everyone, discussing, speaking a little bit. I remember like feeling really immersed, but connecting through the rectangle that connects us all. But then I was so sick of it from May of 2020, and now I still have a challenge connecting back to it, but I'm so glad that we get to connect again on purpose. Yeah. So what was psychedelic experiences, the word sometimes even like challenges me when I hear it, just because it's so overutilized. But the experience that you had on LSD, what was that inviting into you? And I'm wondering if this is like a framework for how the creativity was firing up, how I like using the word vivacious, but the vibrance of life was re-immersing itself and reestablishing itself. What was that like?
Yeah, that's one of the, I said it went from grayscale to color when I did MDMA. And it sounds like my story is a lot about psychedelic experiences because it is. Like, they are a huge tool and shapers of who I am, no doubt about it. And it's kind of like I see myself and like my personality, I see this gigantic like control room inside of my head, and then there's like a little person there.
Is there an escape route? Like a fire exit?
I guess we'll find out probably when I die. But I just see, experiences happen. People come into your life. There's like several screens, and there's this one person. And with every experience, there's like a little bit of adjustment. You turn this knob on, you turn this thing up, you turn this thing down, da-da-da-da-da. It's all this tweaking, right? That's who we are. That's how we are shaped, and that's how I evolved throughout my life. And whenever psychedelics come into my life, there's this huge like adjustment in the knobs of my being. And one of the adjustments that kept happening is like turn on vibrancy for life, and turn on creativity, and turn on possibilities.
Saturation up,
all the way up. And I remember this one experience in particular. It was a wonderful cocktail of LSD and ketamine, and my world just turned up the saturation. And it was as though I was looking at a really old painting where like it's kind of faded, and this thing happened, and I saw like the beginning of life existing, like being birthed. And after that, everything was so vibrant to the point that it is now. And that was like one big turn up. And that's when I started walking down the street just like in awe of leaves, of trees, of color. That's when color started being so important to me, and it to this day it inspires so much in my art. Even though I'm not a visual artist per se, it inspires my writing and my music in so many ways. And you know, my book is huge blob of blue color, which has its own like meaning in my life, but like all colors. And it seems like, I don't know, it can be like it can sound like a small thing. Okay, you like colors, but like there's something so much deeper about it for me, and about experiencing the world in its full vibrancy and the impact that has on like my level of presence and wonder and awe and inspiration and creativity. And LSD, and probably ketamine too, were the things that turned up those knobs. And in that period of my life, I was probably 22, 23. And I was exploring these substances. That's when creativity just started blossoming and flourishing, and I was writing all the time. And that's when I started writing my book too.
Do you have some pieces in there that are from back then?
Oh yeah. I do. Yeah. Most of the beginning of my book is old stuff that I started writing and compiling. And I wasn't planning on writing a book until probably I was like at least a quarter or a third into it. And I was like, oh, I guess there's quite a bit here.
When you look at the pages, because the book is to our right for those who are listening, and to your left, those pages right now that's printed on paper have a lot of the transcriptions of the inner world that you first conceptualized and then created and then transmitted to the paper. When it's sitting there right now, what's your relationship to it?
It feels at this point like a teenage child. It doesn't need me so much as it did. It's like it's in its later teenage years. It still needs me somewhat, and like needs me to show it the ropes and like share it with people. And but I feel like it's its own thing, and it's kind of it's got it from now. Like it's almost just emancipated.
Is there a reverence that you have when you see this right now of the journey that you've been on and the journey that you're inviting to? Because this is almost like this, human beings immortalize themselves through stories. And the way that we live now, provided there's not some big coup that tries to burn the libraries of this civilization down, that says, well, you guys were whack, we need to just clean all this up, and Bleeding Pages gets wiped too. This is the immortalization of this, as this podcast can technically be. This conversation ends up being it. And this is a testament and an embodiment where, did you feel like you were the jester in any way? Were you thinking about how the audience is going to receive, or did you feel like the audience is a part of every word that is bled through?
To be honest, when I was writing this, I didn't think about the audience at all. At many points, I wasn't even going to publish it. I was just writing it for myself. It's not even like, you know, when you're trying to write a book synopsis, it's harder than writing the book itself. I wrote that like 1,000 times over. And at first I was like, oh, it's the story of my healing. It's the story of my healing of childhood sexual trauma. And it's the story of me coming into myself and like learning how to love myself and learning how to navigate romantic relationships, learning how to feel. But it's not a story of that. because it's not like explicit prose. It's not an autobiography. It is the splatter of the blood on the page, hence bleeding pages. Just like you said, like the artistry is to take your heart out, and it's beating and it's bleeding, and the audience and the floor and the shoes, they're all gonna get splattered. And that's essentially the book. It's just a result of the action. So it's not the story of my healing, it is my healing. Had I not written those words, I would have not healed the way that I did. So that is just like the testament, really, of my journey.
Well, this also, the way that you delivered it, this was delivered to my fiance Elodie at the time, and the way that she has delivered it was, it's written beautifully. The way that the pages express themselves are, you see artistic consideration about what the person's experience is going to be as the page turns and as it evolves. But how it was delivered, in addition to that, has a handwritten letter with this, I don't know, like soy or wax.
It's a wax seal.
Wax seal stamp from her. And then it's wrapped in this beautiful cloth that, again, is the same color. And imagine all of our life had that much intentionality on the offerings that we bring to one another, rather than the transactional, just, this is for me, that's for you, do this for me, and I'll do that for you. This embodies a lot of what this gift embodies a lot of who I believe Pandora is. And I think this exists within every single one who listens, but it's the permission that we give to allow that intentionality to come through. Because if I'm thinking about what a layered prescription is, I do feel that the invitations come through the layers of the life experience that you had, the testament to how you consolidated and have a qualitative contact with it, what relationship you continue to have with it, and ultimately what you end up embodying as a testament to all of those things now and moving forward. And I feel that this book is one example of many, that it pays homage to your past, acknowledges that as an invitation for others as well too, stating where you are. And there may be future books that come through, but there's still pieces that now you're allowing the inner world to transcribe and write it with greater peace and grace as you are in contact with me. I feel it, and with others as well too. And you were mentioning the trees that you see differently. Like there's an acronym like BITO, which is BITO, beauty in the ordinary. And when we're out of that, like when we're able to feel holy, or closer to holy, we don't reach for the extremes to invite some feeling back in. We find the miraculous in the simplicities. And I feel that that is a beautiful testament to what you had made yourself available to again. And that's an intimate experience. And I think the most intimate experience we can have there is that intimate experience that emanates from within. Because there's this author, his name's Anthony DeMello, one of my favorites. And he says, like, when you're in the presence of someone else, they don't make you happy. When you're in the presence of someone, happiness arises between us, as intimacy can arise within us as well too. And you know, I hope this doesn't feel like a pivot, but I'm curious how, having had the experience that you had, and inviting what I feel is the embodied level of integrity that you carry yourself with. And I mean, we've all maybe skipped that, and I don't know what your experience was, but I wasn't always feeling like I was close, like approximating to integrity, but I feel like you have, as long as I've known you. How did you reconcile the experience that you had before to embody truth in the intimacy that you can share with another? Because when some people are hurt, and I feel that I was almost going to ask you before, how many women do you feel graduate from being a girl to a woman through some tragedy or some pain? But if as many women have experienced it, it's through some form of sexual trauma. How do you reconcile or reclaim the beauty of the immersion in the permission for being intimate and it being safe?
Yeah, there's no one.
Well, for you, maybe, I guess, yeah.
For it,
I can imagine that, yeah.
It's a process. It's a process. And I think it naturally starts when you start speaking about the experience, and being truthful and being witnessed by others, and seeing that not all, but some people can receive you. And then seeing that some people have the same experience or a similar experience as you. And that's a huge part of why I published. I wrote the book for myself, but I published it for others. If it was just for me, I wouldn't have published. I would just write it and just like leave it in my computer. But when I think of all the women who have gone through something similar, when I think of all the children, when I think of all the humans who have not just gone through like sexual trauma, but any kind of like really intense, difficult experience, and the people who are still in it and don't believe they can come out. You know, those are the people that I really wanted this book to reach, because I see my story as I'm like a stat. You know, there's nothing special about being sexually abused when you're a child. I'm like one of 3 in whatever.
That's insane that stat is that high.
It's very close to that. I might be a little wrong, but it's not pretty. It's not pretty. And the special thing is that I came out of it and I was able to see the beauty in that experience. And I think it's just, that's who I am. That's the artist in me doing all the other personalities in me a favor. Look at this horrible thing. Look how beautiful it is. To everything. That's what my artist does to everything. And that is the gift in the very, very deep, dark hole. And there is a gift in every deep, dark hole. And there is a gift in every difficult experience. And I think the biggest gift is in the most challenging of experiences. If you can think of the most challenging experience in your life, and you know this, like, your biggest gift is in there, is in the middle of the mud. And if you can go there, and if you can dig it, and if you can bring it back up and shine it, you see it. And that is the kind of like hope that I really want people who are maybe like still in apathy, still in denial, still in it, to know like this is possible. I cannot for the life of me remember the question you asked me. I think this is me going on a tangent.
Let it be. Yeah. But
oh, you said, yeah, I got it.
Yeah. See the micro pause. I didn't want to interrupt it. I wanted you to come back to yourself.
You asked me, how do we establish the trust or reestablish the trust? And part of it is to go through the experience, feel all of the feelings, and then dig deep until you find the diamond. You know, dig deep until you find that gem that's hiding in the mud, and then shine it, and then see the experience for what it is. See what you have gained from that. See how you have changed, and realizing that is just one step. That is just one stage in your life. It has shaped who you are, but it doesn't need to limit who you are going to be. And just seeing that for what it is, not letting it bleed so much into every other experience, right? Not letting that one lens shape how you see the world. Because yes, there are untrustworthy men out there, but most men aren't actually untrustworthy. And it took me a while to like really believe that. But it's true. And the more you go out and you meet men like yourself, and you see that like there are men who are just safe, and you can feel it right away. And you need to push yourself out of your comfort zone for sure. You need to immerse yourself in different situations. Something that happens to people, especially people who go through sexual trauma of any sort, is, and apparently this is like a phenomenon in psychology, I think.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not like
Psychology is all theory, right? We apply it as if it's like this absolute, but we have the permission for hypothetical theory and for curiosity to emerge through it, and psychology can gain so much from that. If anyone is feeling confronted, explore that. Okay,
yeah. So they say there's this thing that you just do subconsciously. You re-immerse yourself back into the traumatic experience because it's your body's way of, and your mind's way of trying to reconcile what happened. But as long as you don't have the consciousness that is necessary to realize you're putting yourself in that experience again and you need to react in a different way, you will put yourself in an experience that is just like the traumatic experience, and then you will re-traumatize yourself. So if you have been sexually assaulted, you will go and you feel attracted to unsafe men, and you put yourself in unsafe situations as a way of trying to like reconcile that experience. But if you're not prepared, if you don't have the support, if you don't have the awareness, the awareness that you're putting yourself there again, you might just fall back into that same pattern rather than like, okay, this is a defining moment. I get to act in a different way. I get to, ask for help. I get to put my foot down. I get to run away from this. I get to, whatever it is, call the police. When you gain the awareness and you have the support that is necessary for you to re-immerse in yourself in those situations, great, you can then have a different response. But yeah, that is a whole thing in itself. But you do need to slowly start pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. Go out of think about everything that you think is true with the world, about the world. And then ask yourself, like, what if it wasn't? If you think everyone is out to get you, what if they weren't? How would you react? How would you step out of your home? How would you look at this person across the street? All of our biases about people, about genders, about race, about whatever it is. What if they weren't?
Yeah.
And then see what happens. And that's when you open yourself to possibilities, because chances are you are just seeing a situation through your own lens, and that's it.
That's incredibly important for every human being to consider, especially because this might not mean anything to people who have felt open and the world has been a permissive playground for a long time, where maybe in the life experience that you had freedom to play, and maybe the challenges and traumas were not enough, like profoundly painful enough, that had you have to scan the world and reconsider your safety in it. It's taken me to, I guess, work in the ER to see there will be children that will gravitate towards their parents almost in this reluctance to trust anyone else, versus these other children that are playing around, and it's not that they're disobedient, it's that they know that their parents are there, they know that home is safe, and they get to know a sense of who their self is in their curiosity. And their curiosity is allowed to thrive to a greater degree, and they recognize and almost immerse themselves in the world as if the life is a playground. But if there's some violation that comes, or the child was invited at a very young age to think world isn't safe, often a transference of what the embodiment of the parent was, they will have the highest likelihood of emulating that as well too, and then having a certain level of reluctance to have their own consideration of how they want to interpret the world moving forward, because from such a young age, it was enclosed a little bit. It was forced to think from the lens of this is a potential threat, that's a potential threat, and that's a potential threat. And so what Pandora's inviting in, which I feel is like so important here, is regardless of where you are in that spectrum, having that consideration that who you think you are, how you experience the world, how you think, behave, act, and your capacity to even feel are all worthy of reconsideration to the possibility that it may be another way. And it very often is the case that as the human that you are, there's a spectrum of ways that you can feel. And if you find yourself feeling or not feeling a particular way for a prolonged period of time, that is all of the reason and all of the consideration that's required to reconsider how you can be experiencing your life. Because the invitation that I hope emerges from a podcast like this is reconsidering your experience and your capacity for immersion into life. And it's usually through understanding and reconciling some of the stories that have hurt or were so difficult or inexplicable at a moment in your life that became unavailable temporarily because there was a threat or a potential concern for life in that moment. And it felt existential, even though you didn't realize it to be so. And the permission that you have and support that you can potentially seek through others to navigate through this can only, I believe, start through the inquiry, but also through invitation of others. And this podcast is one of many. And if I could say, like, there's importance in and an opportunity that I feel is so immense at this time, so different from the past, where we have these conversations happening at your fingertips, where a human being can go and reach the most profound conversation while they're scrolling in distraction on their phone. And they meet this revelatory thing that can maybe invite them back into their life. But as you reach for molecules that were deeply supportive of you, there is some careful consideration that has to be had of what we're opening ourselves back into. Because if there has been repression for a very long time, deep amounts of coping, deep amounts of adaptations, and maybe even a fugue, some amnestic episodes, that has pulled the human being so far away from that ever being re-experienced again, going into something like the cold tub can open a human being back up to where the ego had beautifully corked somewhere that it didn't want to go again. And I have seen someone actually been brought back to the completely repressed childhood abuse that she experienced from a family member who had just died a few months before, and she was so unaware of it, and for good reason. And she initially felt liberated, but then it devolved unsupported into greater medicine experiences. And then she ended up going to a facility that when you're no longer compatible with society, you have to go. And so there's a loving caution in the invitation of remaining curious and wonder that to be supported is essential, an essential component that I don't feel is as popularized, because we still lone wolf it in many ways. And though Pandora's journey was beautiful, she was incredibly supported in many ways, and she was very strong in her independence at many times. And not speaking for you, but as I'm witnessing it. And I do exercise the invitation that starting by speaking to the person that you feel you could be in the closest thing to unconditionally witness support of would be an incredible first step of saying that thing that, if you were to take this primer, what is the most difficult thing that you feel will kill you if the world were to see? If you can reflect on that, and maybe it's very difficult to go there. It was difficult for me the first time, and then many times. That area is maybe so gray and obscure in your life, but just by voicing it, and especially witnessed by the presence of other, it brings a vibrance back to the gray. And you start to learn to navigate and tolerate the moments of gray to a greater degree. My goodness. And what I do feel that you're inviting in here is as a testament to the reclamation of the vibrance of your immersion to life. There's a lot of pain for us to societally reconcile, and people are carrying right now. I know people close to me who are hurting, and there's a savior part of me that feels that there's a part of me that can help everyone. but it's not my responsibility, and it's an opportunity. And I feel that reorienting that to extending support, feel that invitations rather than telling anyone to be any other way is the first step in people reconsidering the pain that they've been enduring and suffering in the gray of their life experience, so they can be invited into the possibility of the vibrance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Before emerging into the vibrance, you have to go from gray to full black. You have to go to full darkness. And what you said, like, what is the thing that would kill you, or you feel would kill you if the whole world were to know? I wrote that very similar line on my phone today, because to me, like, that is the artist's job, but that is all of our jobs. I think everyone is an artist regardless of what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And the most profound thing you can do at any moment is to cue into what is the most intensely felt thing that would make you feel sick if you were on live air and you would just had to talk, you had to say something. And what would the thing be? What would the thing that would make you want to puke be? If you can say that at any point in time, okay, maybe not any point in time, there are appropriate moments for it, but given a person that you trust could hold space for you in any capacity, if you can share that with any human being, it will open the door to a completely different life for you.
Mm-hmm.
It will invite the person sitting across from you to step into a position that they might have never been invited to step into, to hold actual space and like be present with a difficult emotion and a difficult human experience. And it'll invite you to step into a different role of being vulnerable, of being the one who takes your heart out of your chest and shows it to another person. And then the invitation back from that person to share that thing with you. And that is the first step into a vibrant life. That is going into the darkness so that you can emerge back with like rainbows everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a process. It doesn't happen like immediately, but that's the journey.
Mm-hmm. And I envision the pains that we experience as a wound, and then if there's a system in place that allows that wound to heal, beautiful. It's our support, our ownership, and our reconciling of it. But in many cases, especially in the formative years or when we experience some type of vicarious trauma that's so beyond our capacity to allow that wound to heal, the wound almost becomes obscure. Mm-hmm. And we'll put band-aids into where we feel the wound is. But after some time, that wound, which keeps swelling in some way, needs to bleed. Mm-hmm. And in that capacity for that wound to bleed, it finally, and ooze whatever's been held within it for so long, it can finally make space for it to reapproximate to itself and to continue to consider the stages of healing. But our psyche, we're speaking so often when we're sharing life experiences and stories, we'll share these thematic analogies, metaphors, fables, things that they're not the words, but the story's association, much like the heart that you're speaking to, the thematic association of it is how our brain is. We are wired to think analogically, which is that we'll also have the thematic association and symbolism that's so deeply intertwined. But if a wound is what you believe yourself to be carrying, then a wound is what is required to be healed. Mm-hmm. And that was ice, nothing else. Do you bleed today?
Every time I step on the stage or put a pen to a page or sit in front of a human being like you who is able to hold space. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If there, I mean, I really appreciate you taking the time for this, and I know I do feel that when you get into these timeless experiences, so much so that I had to restart the camera a couple times and turn my computer, but just making sure that it was still recording, because I'm like, this, I feel the immersion of what we're dialoguing here. The subjects that you brought forth are societies coming around to dialoguing it. I still feel like it's got a long way to go to get to the felt of it and the responsibility of how we can alleviate and prevent transgressions before they occur. And I do feel that we're stepping towards that, where a lot of the anger, repression, and rage of the individuals who have been hurt in the past and who continue to pay that forward are having avenues to catch them, not catch and be punished, but catch and be witnessed as they're able to grieve what pain they have endured. And I feel that that's part of my mission, if there were to be one that I approximate to, where it's purposefulness. Purposefulness, I feel, is the thing that people sell as purpose. I feel like is different than what it should be. Purpose, I hear out in the world, is find your purpose, as if it's hiding behind a tree or under a rock. But purposefulness is the committed efforts that we put towards the world, provided we have the opportunity to even see it, that changes the experience of the entire environment of, first, the things in your approximate surroundings, minimizing, ideally, if possible, and addressing the sufferance of that particular environment to minimize that. Or when I say minimize, not to downgrade its value, but to alleviate the sufferance that exists, and then hope that that expands to a greater degree. And purposefulness ends up being a testament to creating an environment that adapts what your purpose is, which is procreation. And that might be wrong, but I do feel that we use that as a misnomer, because I've heard this saying from Jamie Wheel years ago that says, your genes don't give a single fuck about anything you've experienced. It just wants to procreate. And if you can imagine, a lot of the psychosis, neurosis, and transgressions that we experience agitates the human being so much that they will impose their genes onto others. And what we see as such a live thing, which is abuse and sexual abuse, seems to be like this primal wiring of that exact thing. And I hope that through awareness we can reconsider how that is the case, where a human being acknowledges their purposefulness, acknowledges what their purpose is, and also alleviates some of the weight that prevents them from being connected to life. Because if you're living gray or black, if you hurt someone else, you don't feel any of it. And you may be woken up one day to a sudden moment of vibrance, and you're going to feel the weight of the repressed gray and black moments that you spilled onto others especially. And that guilt and shame is so incredibly painful beyond the words. And I've come to see some people, when they finally witness that moment, and as you mentioned before, you saw that person bleed into the ground, but that blood was repressed for so long that it was a clot. It's disgusting, but also an aspect of what the human experience is. Not to end this on a heavy note, but yeah, I apologize. Like, this, maybe that's my repressed moment of anger there too.
Yeah, no, that's real. Whenever somebody asks me like, "Oh, what's your book about?" I'm like, we're going in. I'm gonna share some dark stuff, and that's my life. And like, I share it not with like a heavy heart, but with just like honesty and recognition that things are difficult sometimes, and we go through really challenging experiences, and the result need not be heavy.
Is there any subject that you think exists in humanity that people should not ever bring forth?
As in talk about?
As in, is there any human experience that is possible that a human being should actually keep repressed and not share with the world in some way for them to alleviate the weight?
I think that we should be able to speak, to dialogue about everything. And I think the repression and the shame and the guilt and the isolation that those feelings creates, that is what then leads a person to act upon things that are, to me, like unnatural to the true essence of a human being, which is love. If we are able to talk openly about things and be witnessed by people and not have that guilt and repression, I think we could just alleviate a lot of that tension and like repurpose that energy into other areas of life, and that would lead people who have particular urges into better avenues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's an opportunity that exists. There are opportunities abundant for the world to heal, but as is the case, there are many places in the world that don't have the permission, the level of awareness, or the opportunity for it to even emerge where they can consider a different way of being. It starts with the individuals who have had the opportunity to reconsider their life and see it. Not that they need to go save others, but invite others and potentially invite tools, avenues, and opportunities for this to reach further individuals who are outside of their current surrounding, outside of their communities, for that to shift as well too. Because as I speak of this, I notice like countries like North Korea, other countries, that there's such a deep level of repression and throttling of anything that is remotely allowing a human being to be in contact with their freedom and their liberation. And I do feel that conversations like this, I wish that they could just play from a megaphone that gives human beings the permission in a safe way where they're not going to be reprimanded or have some type of punishment for bringing truth forward and their truth. Mm-hmm. How many people in the world have been killed for bringing truth forward? Even if it's in all of its chaos, its beauty, its reality, it's stunning to witness. But like the truth today, for anyone who's listening first, the truth that you bring forth will not kill you, especially when you are supported and witnessed by someone who you feel is able to navigate, and they're recognizing that they're not holding the weight and you're not imposing it on them, but starting with someone who maybe isn't the closest person and working your way back to the individual that you initially felt that may be the case. And that may be a psychotherapist. Mm-hmm. I have come to realize over the past few years how powerful they were. You know, when you have a spiritual renaissance, I'm putting my fingers up in quotations, there's almost an ostracization of any consideration for the Western model to be of any help. But I do feel that there is an incredible amount of educational validity of how they can navigate to support you. There are coaches, there are friends who can do that as well too, but an impartial who can be an unconditional, I said that so bad, an unconditional witnesser stands to gain so much as the role that they provide, and an incredible pillar and opportunity for you to have your truths witnessed by someone else and recognize that you won't die from it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any final words that you would like to share, invitations or curiosities before we end?
You had asked me to think about this, and I did, and I already said it.
Beautiful.
Think about the thing that if you were on air, television, national television, 8 p.m., put on stage, what is the thing you're most afraid of saying? What is the thing that makes you sick to your stomach to even think about? I'm not even asking you to share with anyone, just write about it. That to me was the first step. Mm-hmm. And yeah, not everybody is a writer. Maybe you don't call yourself a writer, but I think there is value in writing and journaling for anyone. Mm-hmm. And just expressing that in some way. And writing, I think, is a little easier than saying it out loud. So I start there. And then you say it out loud to somebody. Mm-hmm. And then you go from there. And you see where that takes you. But if you want to create something really impactful in the world, that thing that you're so freaking scared of saying, of sharing, do that. That was my book for me. What is the thing that I can't even think about that makes me want to puke? What is the thing that I won't even share with my best friend, that I won't share with my family? How about we share it with the whole world?
Yeah, and that blood is bleeding in your presence, and I am grateful to have had the opportunity to communicate this with you, and honestly being so deeply vulnerable on sharing things that I wasn't even aware of. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Beyond the words.
Yeah.
Thank you for the offerings that you bring to the world, from vibing with the tribe to finding other variations of that in continuity until the last breath.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to thank my guests for taking the time to share their insights and wisdom. Please consider connecting with them, and their information will be in the show notes. Consider leaving a review and rating the podcast. I'm not going to tell you what to rate. You do as you feel. And please, before this podcast ends and you go on to the next thing, take 3 to 5 minutes in silence to allow some of the information that you heard to be contemplated, digested, and integrated. To the degree that every experience has a moment to actually have it be processed, it has a greater chance for it to be instilled into your life. I wish the rest of your day and week is beautiful. Take care, remain curious, and don't forget to play.